Hey YouTube, welcome back to the conservatory. So, yesterday I got myself busy cutting down the replacement subframe. So we've taken off, like I said, the footrest brackets, cleaned things up a little bit elsewhere, and chopped off the rear and welded in the cross piece. I've also drilled a couple of lightning holes in the regulator rectifier mount, just because I could. Interestingly enough, I did weigh this before I cut it down, and it was coming in shade over 4 kilos. After we've cut it down, it's down to now about 2.5 kilos, so that's quite a significant weight loss really. Quite pleased with that. And it also has got me thinking about other areas where we can look at losing some weight, apart from the obvious, which is myself. But I enjoy tinkering around with bikes and messing around with bikes. I don't enjoy not eating cakes and pies, so I don't think we're going to do a lot this end. So, let's stick this out of the way, and in today's episode we're going to look at the front forks. So the front forks on the NC23, early versions of the NC29 and the NC27, they're all pretty much the same. They're very, very simple damper rod fork. There's not a lot to them. You really don't get a much simpler fork setup than this. So we're going to take the forks out of the yokes, and the first thing I need to do is, I suspect, like everything else on this bike, the fork tubes might be a little bit bent. So I'm going to have to check those first for straightness, so we'll have a look at that a bit later on. So let's get started. Got a little cat who wants to go in the house, so bear with me. Come on in, Wilma. In you go. So whilst the forks that's handy, I can nick her perch. Whilst the forks are still on the bike, now is a good time just to loosen off the fork caps, because they can be quite stiff. We're not going to take them all the way out, just undo them, a couple of turns to make life a bit easier later on. So that's those loosened off, and then we've just got to loosen off these two pinch bolts and the pinch bolts on the top yoke. We also need to loosen off the clip-ons. In fact, I'm actually going to remove them totally and put them back on when we do the rebuild. If you weren't dismantling the bike, you don't really need to take these bolts all the way out, but as the yokes are coming off at some point, it probably isn't going to hurt to do it all now. Okay, so like I said, I suspect these fork tubes are bent, and it's a bit difficult to work that out by eye. So I've got a straight edge, and we're just going to run that around the forks and see if there are any noticeable gaps. And surprisingly, that one doesn't look too bad. But once it's out the fork leg, we'll check it again properly. I think there might be a little bit of a bend here, but as I said, we won't really know until we've dismantled the forks and taken everything apart properly. So I'm just going to remove these pinch bolts. And then on the underside there is an Allen bolt just in here, and that screws into the actual damper rod itself. Now, whilst the spring and everything is still in the tubes, it holds it under tension, which makes it a lot easier to get that Allen bolt undone. Unfortunately, what will normally happen is once you do get it undone, is we will have oil trickling out. So you have to be a bit wary of that. So that's putting up a little bit of a fight, so I'm just going to clamp it in the vise here. Probably have to move you down to see this better. And I'm just going to hold it by the... Bear with me. There we go. So I'm just going to hold it by the caliper mounts. Sometimes these bolts can be really stubborn and you have to use an impact driver to get them out. So, just going to get the handy bucket. And there we have the fork tops. Normally there's only one spacer washer in there. I'll obviously put another one in to give a bit of extra preload. But normally there's just that washer there, and we've added those two penny washers just to give me some extra preload. There's the spring, and there's the damper rod assembly and the bottoming out spring. Doesn't matter how careful you are about trying to rebuild forks, you will always end up getting fork oil everywhere. It just has a natural tendency to leak on everything. That one done. I'm just going to leave that to drain. And give everything a quick wipe down, including myself. common mod with these forks is to nick the fork tops off an NC30 or even the NC29s, because they actually have adjustable tops, so you can adjust the preload externally. The NC23 forks and the NC27 forks sort of predate that, and the NC23s actually have these little air valves in the top, so you can actually air assist them. To be honest, I generally run them with just normal atmospheric pressure in. I don't tend to put any extra air in, but as you'll discover when we rebuild them, these are heavier duty springs, and we're going to use a heavier fork oil in them. Normally the rating of the spring is stamped on the flat on the top, but over time it's worn away. I think these are about 0.85s. On to the next fork leg, exactly the same procedure. In case you're wondering why there's tape around the bottoms of these forks, it's a sort of a racing thing. Normally you need to lock wire any bolts that are sealing in oil, and you'll see once we remove this tape there are actually drain bolts in the bottom of the fork legs. Now if you were just doing an oil chain refresh on it, you can undo these little bolts at the bottom and drain the fork oil out this way, but as we're going to do a full rebuild, I'm just going to empty it out the top. So, just going to mop up the fork oil that I spilt on the floor before I spread it everywhere. And again, we'll give all these parts a quick wipe down. Now I'm just going to label up the damper rods left and right with a permanent marker. It's not critical, but again it's just that thing, the same with the carbs. Things have a habit of wearing together, so it always helps to put things back where they came from. Not so critical for the springs and the various washers. But certainly things like the damper rods, I'd like them to go back in the same legs they came out of. Of course that could all change. If we discover that the actual fork legs themselves are bent, we'll be replacing those anyway. Just getting in the habit of wiping down the tools after each job. Makes life a lot easier in the long run. Okay, right, I'm just going to nick Wilden's little perch and then sit down at the workbench and we'll dismantle the first fork. And there you can see the little drain bolt we were talking about, but that's going to stay in for the time being. So the first thing we want to lever off is the dust seal, and it is just a case of work your way around it with a flat bladed screwdriver and gently prise it up. Okay. It's usually good practice when you're replacing the fork seals to replace these as well. These aren't looking too bad, although the other one looks a bit ropey. So I'll see if I've got some better ones than that. And the next thing is there's a little spring clip in here, and that just retains the oil seal in place. Again, just gently prise it out with a screwdriver. Taking care not to scratch the fork leg while you're at it. Now, the violent part. So, inside here are two bushes, and we're going to knock those bushes against each other, and hopefully they'll act like a slide hammer. And drift the fork seal out. And whilst we've got the fork bottom in our hands, just run a rag round, clean up inside fork leg. Now there is actually another component that stuck itself to the bottom of the fork leg, and that's the actual seat for the damper rod. There you go. Which is this part here. And that actually seats on the end of the damper rod like that. Okay, back to the fork leg. So that's our old oil seal, which we'll be replacing. Then you've got a washer, and then you've actually got the top bush. Now the top bush is actually fixed in place, it's held in the top of the fork leg, and I don't know if you can see, but inside there is a grey coating, and what we're looking at is to see if that coating is worn at all. So it's a bit like the same material as a bearing shell, and that one doesn't look too bad. Normally if it is worn you'll start to see the copper like we've got on the outside, but as I said, that part sits in there and the fork leg actually runs up against the fork bush. You don't have to replace them every time you rebuild the fork legs or replace the fork seals. Again, that one looks pretty good as well. So I think we'll get away with reusing those in this instance, but if you do start to see any sort of copper on there showing through the grey, then they should be replaced. Okay. Also, while you've got the fork legs out, you want to have a look, see if there's any pitting or corrosion on the fork legs. There's a little bit on here, but it's certainly not severe enough to worry about. So, as long as this fork leg is straight, we can reuse it. So this is going to take a little while to check. So I think what I'll do is we'll stop the video here. I'll take the other fork leg apart and I'm just going to give these fork tubes a really good checking for straightness. As I said, I'd be amazed if they aren't bent. So leave me for a little while. We'll be back shortly. Okay, so I've given everything a good clean up. Removed all the smoo, as Quickie would say, and generally tidied up everything. And we're going to start the reassembly. But the first thing I did was I checked the fork tubes for straightness. Now I went along, put the ruler at various points to see if I could detect any sort of noticeable bulge, and I couldn't. But I just couldn't believe that these fork legs weren't bent. So I actually set them up in the lathe on some V-blocks with a dial gauge, like this photo here. I then ran the bed backwards and forwards so that the dial gauge ran along the length of the fork tubes. And again, the most variation I got was about 0.15 of a millimetre anywhere. So much to my surprise, these fork legs have survived intact. And they're all straight, so we can get on with rebuilding the forks now. I've laid everything out kind of like a three-dimensional real life exploded diagram, so that we can actually start assembling everything. Got myself some fork oil. The standard fork oil for these forks is actually a 10 weight fork oil. I'm going to go with a 15 purely because I'm a bit of a bloater. And also for racetrack use, you probably want something a little bit heavier. So that's why I'm going with the 15. If you're just doing a standard rebuild, stick with the 10. So, first thing we want to do is we want to put the damper rod back in the fork tube. So you have the damper rod and then the bottoming out spring. And you can see actually the amount of suspension travel you get is actually only that much. I'm just going to put a bit of fork oil on this bush just to lubricate everything up after we've cleaned everything off. Again, just check that there's no obvious wear or damage to this little bush, and then we literally slide that in like that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to refit the bushes. Now I'm reusing the old bushes. I did check them and there's absolutely no wear on them at all. Whilst I was sorting out the garage the other day, I did find some old bushes that I kept for this video, and you can see on this one, hopefully you can just see the wear. So there's a little line of copper along there, and we've got some rubbing in there, and you can just see the copper starting to show through on the bush. So that one's scrap, that needs replacing. But as I said, luckily with these forks, the bushes are in good order. So again, just going to put a little bit of fork oil on them just to get everything lubricated up, and it just literally snaps into place. Okay. knocking everything about on the workbench here. Right, we can then fit, this is the damper rod seat, and you can see there's a groove around here, and there is actually a recess machined in the end of the tube, right down at the bottom, that this sits into. So we just slide that into place. And then this is the fun bit, trying to get everything to seat. Now we have the retaining bolt and the copper washer. Brand new, got brand new copper washer here. The problem with these little copper washers is they're actually an oddball size. The overall diameter is less than a standard washer, so unfortunately you do have to buy these special washers, and they're about £1.30, £1.50 each, but not really a lot we can do about that. Does seem rather expensive for a copper washer, but what can you do? Right. So the washer and the bolt go up through the hole in the bottom of the forks, and they should screw into the damper rod. Now, with everything all cleaned, it should screw in nicely without any problems, purely from the weight of the components pushing down on the damper rod. Now we've got so far, but it doesn't want to tighten up, so daft as it may sound, we're going to have to jump ahead, put the springs in, put the spacer rod in, and I'm just going to lightly screw the cap on. And annoyingly, we're going to take it all out again in a minute. But what that does now is the spring actually puts some tension on the damper rod on the bottom, which stops it turning while we tighten up this bolt. Actually, rather than the Allen key, I'll be better off using the socket. We just snug that up nice and tight. And take the fork cap out. And everything back out. And now you can see our forks are in place and everything's held nice and firm. So I'm just going to clamp the fork leg in the vise so that it's upright. Obviously you don't want to go mad tight with the vise, just enough to hold it in place. If you did take the little drain bolts out the side, make sure they're tightened up, and then we can look at adding the top bush and the sealing washer. So I'm just going to move the camera up a little bit. Okay, so we're going to take our bush, again, a bit of lubrication on it, just get a bit of fork oil on there. slides in there and it sits in the machined recess. Put the washer on, and now for the noisy violent bit, we have to hammer that home. What I've got here is a homemade fork seal driver. It's an old fork leg and I've just machined it down to suit, but obviously you can buy proper ones on eBay, Amazon, wherever you prefer to shop from. And then you just want to drive it home enough that you can see the groove where our retaining. Okay, so I think that's all the way home. You can just double check it by taking the washer off, and it should sit flush with the machined edge just in here. Okay. Got our washer on, and then we're going to put the fork seal on. These particular fork seals I got from Athena. As with anything, you can get really cheap fork seals. You can buy the OEM ones. I kind of like these Athena ones. They're a reasonable price and seem to work well. So that's my preferred brand. Obviously, you can buy all sorts. The other thing you want to do is make sure you put it in the right way up. And normally on these there's a thin groove, and then you can see there's the wider opening. That bit goes at the bottom. So again, just going to put a little bit of lubrication on, just to help them slide into place. And very carefully slide it over the fork leg, trying to keep it square. Now there is this groove here, just be very careful as you go over that. Right, it goes so far, and they go in, make sure it goes in square. And again, out with the driver. A couple of good firm taps. And you want to drive it just enough that it goes below the groove that the retaining spring sits in. Which for some reason I've missed off on the pile of parts. So there's our retaining ring. You just want to press them in. Now you might need a screwdriver just to drive it home. Be very gentle. Make sure that you don't nick the side of the fork stanchion. And then finally we put our dust seal in. Now normally I would buy new ones, and I must admit one of the ones on here was a bit ropey. Now although these are classed as a dust seal, they are actually quite important. They are the first line of defence in getting rid of all the muck, and they act as a scraper, and they scrape all the muck off the fork leg before it gets to the oil seal. So if you're replacing your oil seals, it's always a good idea to replace these. This one, being a race bike, it's not going to be out in all weathers all year round. It's really only going to be used in fine weather, obviously a little bit of rain now and again. Being a race bike, it's always going to get a good clean down after each session. So not so critical. So I've actually nicked these off a better pair of forks and just drive around the edge with a hammer on a dead blow rubber hammer. Again, staying away from the fork legs, or fork stanchions even. One final thing to fit is the mudguard retainer. Now these do come marked left and right. Obviously this is the left hand fork leg, and on the larger of the two lugs it should have left or right stamped on it. And also, you can get them upside down, just look, there's a 45-degree chamfer that goes on the top. So that just slides on there. And then we've got this little metal spring. That holds it in place, and that should snap into the groove on the fork leg, so that now that's held in place. Okay, right, filling up with fork oil. The recommendation for these is 95mm. And you have to do it with the fork upright, without the spring and the spacer in, and the fork leg at the bottom of its travel. So I've got a rather natty little tool here, which is a fork oil measuring device. And basically what it is a big syringe always goes a bit dry after storage. Just put a bit of fork oil on that and lube that up actually. That's better. Length tubing, and then this bit of hose, this bit of pipe here, it's got measurements on it. Problem with doing forks is you get bloody fork oil everywhere. Okay, so the tube slips over the end, and then we've got this collar that clamps onto the tube. And we just set up where we want it. And that should be 25. Let's check it with a ruler. Then the idea is you pour your fork oil in, sit this in the top, and then you just suck out any excess oil. Now, you don't have to splash out and buy something as flash as this. What you can do is you could just get a cable tie, measure 95mm, and then when you fit the oil, you just sit it in here until the oil just touches where you want it. Ideally you want something a bit wider than this, and the problem is, of course, if you've got too much oil, you've got to take the whole assembly out, pour the oil out and gradually add it until it gets to the right place. So the little tool here saves all of that. Right, let's pour some oil in. Now the capacity of this is about half a litre, so half of this this bottle. I'm just going to put about 300 ml or so in. And then you just want to work the stanchion up and down to get the oil through the system and bleed any air out that's trapped. You can hear it sucking through the damper rod as you do it. You don't want to do it too fast because you don't want to be creating more air bubbles. You just want to enough just to suck the oil through. Although you can't see it, I can see that just doing that the levels dropped quite a bit already. There are some little air bubbles starting to appear on the top. So we'll add another 100 ml. And just repeat. Finally, top it up to almost where it wants to be. There we go. Right. Now we can check the level. I'm just going to put that in. It's one of those tools where you need sort of 3 hands really. Okay, so you can see there's not enough oil in there because it's not sucking anything up. So I'm just going to add a little bit more in. Try again. And there you can see it's sucking out the excess. And obviously what it'll do is it'll keep sucking the oil out until the oil drops below the end of the tube at our desired height. We know our oil level is set to 95 millimetres. So yeah, great little tools, well worth investing in if you're going to do this on a regular basis. But if you haven't got spare cash hanging around, they're not expensive, they're only about £20–25. Then, like I said, the little trick with the cable tie works quite nicely. Okay, so now we lower our spring in. Don't just lower it in, don't be tempted to drop it in, otherwise you'll end up with a big splash of fork oil. Then we've got separating washer, and then our spacer, which obviously protrudes. Okay, now these extra washers and bits I'm going to put in, they're not actually standard parts, but they're just there to give the forks a little bit of extra preload. Obviously, like I said earlier on in the video, quite a common swap on these is to replace them with the NC29 or NC30 fork tops. I think even VFR 750 fork tops, anything of that nature fits, and they have got a preload adjuster. So just put a little bit of pressure, pushing down on it until it locks in, and then we just need our socket, 17mm, isn't it? Now, you can't fully tighten it because obviously the fork tube is just going to rotate on you. So remember, when you do clamp the fork legs back into the yokes, and once it's all tightened up, just give that a little tweak to make sure that it is fully tightened. The other thing to check, of course, is that we've got no oil leaking out the bottom, which we haven't. So that's our first fork leg completed. Just wipe off the excess fork oil. And now it's a case of repeat for the second fork leg. So I shall get on with that now. Hope that helped. If you've got any comments, please leave them below. Yeah, please, obviously, like all YouTubers, if you could like or subscribe to the channel, that'd be great. I've got no Patreon or anything like that, so I won't be bugging you about that. But yeah, a few more subscribers would certainly help the channel. So thanks for watching, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you in the next one.